I always thought I knew what love looked like. I believed in the warmth of family dinners, in the comfort of a mother's hug, and the loyalty that came with being part of a home. But sometimes the people you trust the most carry secrets so deep, they hide in plain sight, just behind a look, a glance that lingers 1 second too long. I never imagined that a single moment, one look from my own mother, would make everything I thought I knew about my family start to crumble. It started on an ordinary Sunday morning. The kind where the sunlight filters in just right through the kitchen window and the smell of pancakes makes everything feel safe. My father sat across the table sipping coffee, reading the paper like always. My mother was humming softly as she moved between the stove and the sink. And then, the doorbell rang. He was just a family friend, or that's what I had been told. Mark. Charming, always smiling, a bit younger than my dad but older than me. He was the kind of guy who could make everyone laugh, the kind people naturally liked. He used to come over now and then, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to help Dad with the car. No one ever questioned it. Not even me. But that day, something was different. I saw it clearly. When my mother opened the door and saw Mark standing there, her whole face changed. Her eyes lit up, not in the way they do when you see an old friend, but in a way I had never seen before. Like she was trying to hide something but couldn't. And then she smiled, soft, slow, as if the world had paused just for them. I froze. I wasn't supposed to notice it, I guess. But I did. That look, it wasn't meant for a family friend. It wasn't innocent. It meant something else, something I couldn't explain but felt in my gut. Something was wrong. The rest of the day moved on like normal, at least for everyone else. But for me, something had shifted. I started watching her more closely. The way she laughed too easily when Mark was around. The way she avoided Dad's eyes when she thought no one was looking. I told myself I was imagining things. That maybe I was reading too much into it. But deep down, I knew something was off. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I walked in and called out, but no one answered. That's when I heard soft whispers coming from the kitchen. I crept closer, my heart pounding so loud I thought they might hear it. What I saw next changed everything. It wasn't just a look anymore. That moment became the beginning of everything falling apart, my trust, my family, and the version of my mother I thought I knew. What I discovered after that night was something no child should ever have to carry. And it all began with one look. I didn't say anything that night. I just stood there, quietly stepping back before they noticed me. My hands were shaking, my mind trying to process what I had seen. It wasn't anything dramatic, no one was kissing or caught in some obvious way. But it was the closeness, the way my mother stood just inches away from Mark, her voice softer than usual, her smile too private. And Mark, he wasn't acting like a visitor. He was acting like he belonged there. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling, asking myself the same question over and over again, was I imagining it? Was I reading too much into something that wasn't really there? But my gut said otherwise. Something in the way she looked at him, the way she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear while talking to him, it felt too familiar. Too intentional. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to the little things. Things I had ignored before. Like how my mother always made Mark's favorite dessert whenever he visited. How she laughed more when he was around. How my dad seemed almost invisible during those moments, sitting in the background while Mom and Mark talked like old friends sharing some secret world. And then there were the phone calls. My mother never used to take calls in the laundry room. But suddenly, she started spending more time there, whispering into the phone with the door closed. Whenever I'd walk past, she'd lower her voice or hang up quickly. And if I asked who it was, she'd just smile and say, just a friend. That's when I began questioning everything. Were there signs all along that I just didn't see? Did my dad really not notice, or was he pretending not to? And who even was Mark, really? How did he get so close to our family? Why was he always around? I tried asking subtle questions, testing the waters. But my mother was careful, too careful. Her answers were always vague, always just enough to move on. And the more she dodged, the more I knew there was something to hide. The house started to feel different. It wasn't warm anymore. It was quiet, tense. Like everyone was acting for each other, walking on eggshells without knowing why. But I knew. I just didn't know what to do with it yet. And all the while, that look haunted me. The look that started it all. A week passed, then another. The more I watched, the more uneasy I felt. Mark's visits became more frequent and oddly timed, sometimes during the day when Dad wasn't home. Once, I came home from school early and saw his car parked 2 blocks down, as if he didn't want anyone to notice. But I noticed. I noticed everything. At school, I started pulling away from my friends. I couldn't focus, couldn't laugh at their jokes like I used to. I was carrying this strange weight inside me. Something that didn't belong to me, but now it was mine anyway. I felt trapped. I couldn't tell Dad. I couldn't tell anyone. Who would even believe me? It sounded crazy. Even I didn't want it to be true. I started keeping a journal, writing down every detail, every visit, every strange look, every quiet phone call. It felt like the only way to hold on to what I was seeing, to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. But the more I wrote, the more real it all became. This wasn't just some teenage overthinking. This was a pattern. Something secret. Something dangerous to our family. One night, during dinner, Mark texted my mother. I saw her phone light up on the counter, and the name flashed for just a second. Her hand moved fast, almost too fast, as she grabbed it and turned it over. No one else saw it, but I did. I didn't eat much after that. I just stared at my plate, wondering if my father noticed any of it. He laughed at something she said, completely unaware, or maybe pretending. That made me even more confused. Was he blind, or just choosing not to see? Around that time, I started catching my mom staring at me. Not in a warm, motherly way, but as if she was wondering if I knew. Like she could feel my eyes on her, feel my thoughts. It became a silent game between us. She'd smile, act normal, but behind her eyes, there was something else. Guilt maybe. Or fear. Or worse, nothing at all. I even tried talking to Mark one day, casually. Asked him about his job, his life. He was smooth, always smiling, never giving anything away. But his eyes shifted when I brought up my dad. Just a flicker, but enough to know he felt something too. And that's when I realized. I wasn't just watching a story unfold. I was standing right in the middle of it. It all came to a head on a rainy Thursday evening. The kind of night where the sky stays dark too early, and everything feels a little heavier. I came home soaked from the bus stop. The lights in the house were off, which was strange. My mom was almost always in the kitchen by then, making tea or prepping dinner. But that night, there was silence. I walked in slowly, trying not to make noise. I don't know why I was being careful, it was my house, after all. But something inside me was warning me. Something didn't feel right. I put my bag down and took a few steps toward the hallway when I heard faint voices, low, hurried, coming from the living room. I froze. One voice was definitely hers. Soft, emotional. The other was Mark. I could tell from the rhythm, the way he spoke her name. I stepped closer, heart racing, my shoes still dripping onto the wooden floor. I didn't want to listen, but I couldn't stop myself. Every step felt like a betrayal, but not listening felt worse. They weren't arguing. That's what chilled me. They were whispering, intimate, close. She was telling him something about timing, about how things couldn't go on like this. He said he understood, but he sounded frustrated, like he'd been waiting too long. I couldn't see their faces, just shadows through the cracked doorway. But their closeness told me everything. I backed away, almost tripping over the corner of the rug. My chest was tight, like I couldn't breathe. I went up to my room, locked the door, and sat in the dark. My hands were shaking. This wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was real. It was happening right under our roof, and no one knew except me. Later that night, my father came home. I listened as he greeted them both like everything was normal. I wanted to scream, to tell him not to be so blind, to see what I saw. But I couldn't. I didn't have proof, only moments. Glances. Words behind walls. I decided then that I needed to know the whole truth. No more guessing. No more hoping it was all in my head. I had to see it clearly, without a doubt. I had to know what kind of person my mother really was, and how long this had been going on behind my father's back. Because once I knew, I couldn't unknow. And after that, nothing would ever be the same. I thought I was prepared for anything. I thought once I accepted the truth, that my mother was involved in something secret with Mark, I could brace myself for whatever came next. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found just a few days later. That weekend, my dad asked me to help him clean out the old cabinet in the storage room. He was looking for some tools, and honestly, I needed the distraction. We were pulling out boxes of old photo albums, birthday cards, random stuff that had been sitting there for years. That's when I came across a plain black notebook wedged between two boxes. It didn't look familiar. It didn't have a label, no name. I flipped it open, thinking maybe it was a list of old expenses or recipes. But it wasn't that. It was my mother's handwriting. Pages and pages of thoughts, entries dated months back. At first, it was boring stuff, groceries, reminders, chores. Then it shifted. The entries got personal. Detailed. Conflicted. She wrote about feeling trapped. About how her life had started to feel like a role she was playing, not one she chose. She never mentioned names directly, but there were clues. Mentions of a he that made her feel seen again. How she hadn't felt that way in years. How she knew what she was doing was wrong, but how part of her didn't care anymore. And then, one line stood out, sharp and clear, he says he can give me a new life. He wants me to leave with him. But I'm scared, because it would destroy everything. My hands were cold. I could barely keep turning the pages. That wasn't just an affair. That was a plan. A life-changing decision waiting to happen. My mother was thinking about leaving us. Leaving me. I quickly hid the notebook in my room. I didn't tell my dad. I didn't know how. But that night, everything changed. Suddenly, I wasn't just afraid of her secret being exposed. I was afraid of waking up one day and finding her gone. And then came the next twist. I was in the kitchen alone when I saw Dad's phone buzz on the counter. A message preview popped up, and I froze when I saw the name, Mark. But it wasn't my mom's phone. It was my dad's. The message was short, still good for tomorrow? She won't know a thing. My entire body went numb. Why was Mark texting my dad? Why was he pretending to hide something from her now? That's when a terrifying thought crept in. What if my father wasn't as clueless as I thought? What if he knew everything? Or worse, what if he had his own game playing in the background? The betrayal I thought belonged to just one person might be a web with more than two. Suddenly, I wasn't sure who was lying to who. And I had no idea who I could trust anymore. I couldn't sleep that night. The notebook was still under my bed, and the image of that message on my dad's phone kept flashing through my mind. She won't know a thing. The words played on repeat, louder than my thoughts. For weeks I believed my dad was the one being betrayed, but now, something was off. The roles were shifting, and I didn't know who was hiding what anymore. The next morning, I decided to follow my dad. I told them both I had an early class and left the house, but instead of school, I stayed near the street corner, waiting. At around 10, he left the house. I followed from a distance, careful not to get too close. He drove across town and pulled into the parking lot of a small diner. A few minutes later, Mark showed up. They sat at a table by the window. From where I stood across the street, I couldn't hear them, but I could see enough. They weren't arguing. They looked calm, even friendly. At one point, my dad leaned in and said something that made Mark nod seriously. Then they both shook hands, and Mark left. My dad stayed behind, staring out the window like he was deep in thought. I went home before he did, confused, heart racing. When he walked through the door later, I pretended everything was normal. But my mind was spinning. What were they planning? What did my dad know that I didn't? That evening, everything came crashing down. I came downstairs to find my parents in the living room. My dad was holding the black notebook. My notebook. I must have forgotten to lock my door. My mom looked pale. My dad looked calm, too calm. He didn't yell. He didn't even look angry. He simply said, "So now we're all on the same page." My mother looked at me, tears in her eyes. "You read it?" she asked softly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Then my dad took a deep breath and said something that flipped everything on its head. "I've known for a while. I've been letting it play out. I wanted to see if she would tell me the truth." He looked at my mom, not with hate, but disappointment. She didn't. I thought that was it, the end of our family. But then he added, "Mark's been helping me. He's not who you think he is. He used to be a private investigator. I hired him months ago." I froze. All this time, Mark wasn't just the man in the middle of it all. He was part of my father's plan. My mother's secret wasn't just discovered by me, it had been watched, tracked, documented. My father had known everything. And just when I thought it couldn't get any more twisted, my mom whispered, "You think you were the only one watching?" That's when I realized, their marriage hadn't been real for a long time. They had both been hiding, both playing each other. And I was the one who finally uncovered it all. That night changed everything. After the truth came out, the house felt colder, but not in the same way as before. This was different. It wasn't just about secrets anymore. It was about realizing that the people you think you know best can live entire lives behind closed doors, even while sitting across the same dinner table. My parents sat together for hours after that. No yelling. No dramatic ending. Just a quiet conversation between two people who had once loved each other but had clearly drifted so far apart they could no longer pretend. I didn't stay in the room. I didn't need to hear every word. I already knew more than I ever wanted to. In the days that followed, everything came out in the open. My dad admitted that he'd suspected the affair for almost a year but didn't want to confront it without proof. That's why he hired Mark, someone he trusted from his past, someone who could get close without raising suspicion. It worked better than expected, maybe too well. Somewhere along the way, Mark started to blur the lines. He never crossed them, not physically, my dad believed. But emotionally, the bond was there. It was real. And it hurt my father deeply, even though he saw it coming. As for my mom, she didn't deny it. She said she never meant to fall for someone else, that it happened slowly, like water seeping through cracks. She felt invisible in the marriage and had stopped hoping things would ever change. Her notebook was never meant to be read by anyone. It was just her way of dealing with a life she didn't know how to fix. They eventually agreed to separate, peacefully. No long battles, no court fights. Just a quiet understanding that staying together for appearances would only make things worse, for them, and for me. They both moved out within a month, to separate places. My dad got a small apartment nearby. My mom moved in with her sister for a while to figure things out. Mark disappeared, and honestly, I didn't miss him. He served his role, whatever that truly was. But in the end, he was just part of a much bigger story. Looking back now, I've learned more in those few weeks than I ever did from any class or book. Trust isn't about words, it's about actions, patterns, and how people show up when no one's watching. Family isn't just about sharing a home, it's about honesty, respect, and the quiet bond that holds everything together. She was just my mother. But that look, that moment, it meant something much bigger. It cracked open a world I wasn't ready to see, but maybe it needed to happen. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't destroy a family. It reveals who's strong enough to rebuild it. And that's where this story ends. Not with blame, but with clarity. Not with anger, but with lessons that I'll carry for the rest of my life. A true infidelity story, but also a story about truth, choice, and finally letting go. 52.